It then came to the final month, and all of a sudden, that process that we'd run 11 times and had always been perfect disappeared. What was very interesting to me was the other side instantly started to do everything as slow as possible without breaching contract.
Welcome to the Tech for Non-Techies podcast. I'm your host, tech entrepreneur, executive coach, and Chicago Booth MBA, Sophia Matveeva. My aim here is to help you have a great career in the digital age. In a time when even your coffee shop has an app, you simply have to speak tech. On this podcast, I share core technology concepts, help you relate them to business outcomes, and most importantly, share practical advice on what you can do to become a digital leader today. If you want to have a great career in the digital age, this podcast is for you. Hello, smart people. How are you today? I'm really excited about today's episode because it's literally nothing like what you would have heard before on this show or probably on any other show. Today, we are going to hear about what happens when a startup gets sold. And this is a warning story because most of the time when somebody sells a company, they go and they announce it and it's all glorious. But what we don't know is what actually happens before they get the cash and how much cash do they actually get. And from what you will see today, the inside of an exit is extremely messy. And if you don't pay attention, then you can lose a lot of money for really stupid reasons. Like, this founder will tell you how he literally lost about $700,000 because he didn't capitalize 2 words. I kid you not. So if you're a founder, a corporate innovator, or an investor, or if you ever want to sell a company or advise a person selling a company, then you have to listen to this episode till the end. We all want to believe that the universe is a friendly place, but sometimes it isn't. And it gets less friendly when millions of dollars or pounds are at stake. So, I hope you learn from this episode before you need to know this stuff. Hello, Sam Oliver, and welcome to the Tech for Non-Techies podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
Hi there, Sophia. Thank you so much for having me.
So, you are a repeat founder, Sam. So, how many companies have you founded?
I have founded 4 companies.
Amazing. So you just can't get enough. And so from what I understand, you had a very interesting exit story from your last company. And I would love the audience to hear about it and to learn from it. But first of all, what was the company that you were running? And then tell us about the exit story.
So I was running a company called Property Technology Limited, and we developed a marketing software called Lead Pro. And it was specifically for estate agents in the UK. And over the period of running that company, we grew it to a 37% market share of UK estate agents.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's pretty impressive. So when you were doing so well, and you created this yourself, or did you have a co-founder involved?
So I originally started the business with a co-founder, and we started running an appointment viewing software for letting agents. So we really thought about what is the problem that most people face when they inquire to view a property on Rightmove or Zoopla. They just want to find a time to view the property. So let's build a software that makes it easy to just book that viewing online with the estate agent. And we built this amazing piece of software, and no estate agents wanted to use it. They wanted to keep control of the viewing and booking process. And after about a year and a half of running that, we were in a pretty tough spot. Co-founder left the business, and then we pivoted. And we pivoted based on feedback from one of our pilot customers who they were kind of like, the appointment viewing stuff's not that interesting. However, if you could just do this, and this, that would be really useful. So we went on to add the features that they wanted. And we did that again and again, listening to their feedback until we found product market fit.
There are so many interesting things in there because one of the points I think we want to point out is that even if you make something useful for the users, if the users are not paying, but it's the customers that are paying, if they don't want it, doesn't matter what the users think,
money talks, right? So I think that's kind of lesson one. Lesson two, for all the founders that are listening and all the people who incorporate innovation, I think there's another lesson here, is that usually the first idea, usually the first MVP that you get to market with is often not the one that you end up with, or it's not to the target market. So then it's a question of, okay, can you survive to learn to make the thing? So what was the thing that finally got you to the finish line?
So we previously had built this really big piece of viewing and application software that could allow you to schedule a viewing, apply for a property, do your reference checks and do your financial checks, your credit checks. And it was this huge piece of software. And we spent a lot of time and money building it. And eventually we zoomed in to just 5% of the functionality, which was this pre-qualification piece. So what we were doing was every single email that came in from Rightmove or Zoopla to an estate agent to request to view a property, we would reply back to that person. We would send them a branded reply. So it would be as Knight Frank, as Winkworth, as Belvoir, emailing and texting them back, asking them a bunch of questions to pre-qualify if they were a good fit for the property. And that was where we really started to add value. So a small part of the value was it just helped separate the wheat from the chaff and find out who were the progressible applicants who really wanted to view or apply for the property. But where we really started to make money was when we asked those people, oh, you would like to view this property for sale, but do you have a house you need to sell? Or are you buying this property to let? Or do you need mortgage advice? Or do you need insurance? And that was where we started to become, instead of like a painkiller efficiency tool, we started to become, instead of a vitamin efficiency tool, we became a real painkiller tool where we are actually helping generate new business leads. And that was really, really valuable for the customers. And once we kind of understood that and we understood how to pitch that, it would be a case of turn on this software and we'll help you win more business. And that's when sales started to really tick up.
Interesting, because I think there's another lesson in here, which is basically the closer you are to helping your customer make money, the easier it is going to be to build a business. So, for example, let's even just take a training company. If you are, well, because I run one, obviously, that's what I know about. So if you're training a cost center, like say, I don't know, HR or accounting, they just get smaller training budgets because they're a cost center. But if you are training the profit center, say the salespeople or the people who are, doing the job that brings in the money, say the lawyers, then actually the training budgets and just the budgets to keep those people happy and keep them productive and coming back to work, it's kind of all for them. So again, for all the founders, I think if you want to build something, the closer you are to the origination of cash, the better. And so you built this amazing company, obviously had this rocky journey like every founder. And then what happens?
I'd actually, just before I go into the next part, I would so echo your point there that it blows my mind that you can go to a company and say, hey, we can help you save £300,000 a year and it's only going to cost you £12,000. And they're like, we're already spending the money. We don't really care. Whereas if you go in and say, oh, we can make you £48,000 a year of new business and it's only going to cost you £12,000. They're like, oh, great. I look really good in my sales meetings. It's going to help me hit my revenue targets. So it's definitely much easier to sell a product that adds revenue rather than creates efficiency. And to ask your next question, I think the next point in the story, to not glamorize the startup journey too much, is COVID coming along. So we pivoted and we actually ran a Google design sprint to really try and find out where we could add value. We found this 5% of the original product. It resonated really well with the market. We learned how to package it up and sell it. And we then started to get traction. And the company was then growing nicely. We got to profitability. We'd sort of taken on a very small round of angel funding and £150,000. And we then used that to get to like £44,000 a month in revenue, profitable business, and nice growth trajectory of picking up new customers. And then COVID came and the market completely closed and all of our customers just stopped paying. like they did for pretty much every service. So that was super difficult, where being a startup, we didn't have huge cash reserves. We were still paying staff. We pulled down staff hours. This was before furlough scheme came out. I was able to remortgage a house to put money into the business. Investors lent money to the company to keep the lights on. We lost a couple of really talented staff because they could get full-time hours elsewhere. And that was really, really tough. And we almost lost one of our key customers to a competitor in the space. So it was exceptionally tough during that period. The pendulum of fate swung the other way. And thankfully for us, we were very fortunate to be in one of the markets that boomed. So the property market after COVID, everyone wanted to move house, and the property market had its busiest time ever. And that meant that all of our clients, the estate agents, had a huge amount of budget to put into marketing and growth. And as a result, our sales ticked right back up. During that period, we had a couple of competing offers, one from a competitor in our space and one from one of our customers who was a distributor. They bought our technology and then they resold it for a premium to their customer base. And they saw us as a very strategic acquisition because they knew how good the technology was and they really wanted to own it. It was super interesting time for a couple of reasons. One was that customer is owned by private equity, and they were doing something called a roll-up, where they were buying multiple different companies to put them together to structure them for a sale. So the plan for the private equity guys being buy these companies at 2 to 5 times EBITDA and then put together a growth story in a business that's scaling that can sell for 15, 20 times EBITDA and make their multiple. The other thing that was, once again, favorable market conditions for us was interest rates had been low for a very long time. So there was a lot of cash out there. Money was very cheap, and a lot of big companies to boost growth were looking at acquiring. So we were kind of caught in this perfect storm. And I managed to go and speak to the actual private equity guys at the hedge fund that owned the company to talk about selling the business to them. And at the time, I was 31 years old. The business was doing the best it had ever done. And I didn't really necessarily want to sell the company. I was enjoying growing. We were at 14 staff. We were doing really well. But at the same time, I had remembered the difficult time of borrowing money, leveraging my own assets to keep the business alive, almost going bust. And I also knew that if we didn't exit the business then, it might be another 5 years before we could exit. So it felt like a good time to explore it. But the strategy that I took was sort of saying, look, I don't want to sell. I'm really excited about the business for this reason, this reason, this reason. Thank you very much for the offer, but no thanks. And what came back from the hedge fund guys were, well, what would you sell it at? What's your number? So I had thought about what would be my sale price, and we discussed it. And they said, okay, let us come back and see if we can structure a deal that would get there. And what they came back with was saying, we don't think your business is worth that much money. We would pay this much for your business. However, if you can prove the growth trajectory that you think it's worth, we can structure an earnout where you can get what you want if you hit these targets and deliver. So I ended up doing, in 2021, October, we sold the business 5 years after launching it. And it was split into initial cash consideration and then an earnout that depended on the growth of the company in the next 12 months.
Okay. Well, so I'm anticipating what's going to happen next. But you know what? Before we even get to the dramatic bit, why don't we just say congratulations? Because this is really tough. And so you achieved something really difficult. And then you got a bit of cash. And then what happened?
Going from cradle to exit, don't want to say grave because the company is still running. It's super hard and the statistics are hard. And I'm very grateful. I feel like we were lucky. Luck definitely plays a role, but we also showed up, put in the work and didn't give up. So one of my more seasoned investors had cautioned me on doing an earnout. He proposed 2 things. One thing was to add a clause to the share purchase agreement, which stated that every month we would calculate the company's growth as if it was the last month. And we would agree on the earnout amount. And by doing that 12 times before the final time, we would have got the process down, it would be resolved, and there would be no issues. The second thing that he recommended was putting the intellectual property in escrow until the earnout payment had been made. Now, I didn't want to torpedo the deal. And I felt that escrow ask was too high an ask. So I never actually even asked for that. Retrospectively, definitely should have asked for that because it would have retained power and leverage in the negotiation and relationship. The other clause we did put in, and every month myself and the acquirer's finance director sat down, calculated the earnout, recorded the video call running through it, and got it agreed in writing. And the revenue growth was going fantastically. It then came to the final month, and all of a sudden, that process that we'd run 11 times and had always been perfect disappeared. What was very interesting to me was the other side instantly started to do everything as slow as possible without breaching contract. So previously, we would have agreed the earnout amount at the end of the month within perhaps a week, sometimes less. The contract at the end gave a month to do that. So they took the whole month. And I was like, guys, why are we taking the whole month? We can do this quicker. What they came back with was almost half what we had agreed in writing for the previous month. So it was like this crazy low offer. And I was like, what the actual, I was like, what? So I couldn't believe that they had come with such a radically different calculation, especially because in the very final month of the earnout, we'd had our best month ever, a whole bunch of deals finally closed. So we were meant to be even further ahead. Now, the process for reconciling this was essentially to try and have a meeting. Both sides come together, and we had 30 days to reconcile. So I had a meeting, and they basically said, okay, do you accept our offer? And I was like, no, of course I don't. Here's all the reasons why. And they were like, oh, well, we're very disappointed that you've not tried to accept the offer. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And at the time, I hadn't realized that it was just a box ticking exercise so that we could move on to the next part of the arbitration process. On the last day that we could agree the earnout amount before it went to arbitration, I also got called by the group CEO who told me that my role was at risk of redundancy and they were going to take me through the process of making me redundant, which I found was super interesting timing from a negotiation standpoint. So what happened then was we went into the arbitration process, and this involved getting a chartered accountant that was registered with the Institute of Chartered Accountants for England and Wales to act as an expert determinator to review the accounts and essentially say, this is the right amount. And whatever they said, both parties had to agree to. So I contacted all of the chartered accountants on their website. I asked them all for fee quotes. I explained the price and I emailed about 120 accountants, and I got quotes back from about 37 accountants. And the average quote was about £16,000 to do the work. So I went back to the other side and I said, look, you pick any of these accountants. I don't care. Let's get this ball rolling. Let's get it done. They didn't propose a single accountant, and they refused to select any of the accountants. So what happened was, if after another month we couldn't mutually agree an accountant, we then, the next stage of the arbitration process was for the Chartered Institute of Accountants for England and Wales to be assigned for them to then pick the accountant. So there's a couple of problems with this from the point of the seller. The first problem is it costs £15,000 to do this. So instantly we have to pay additional fees. The second problem is that took 2 months for them to find an accountant, because they have to run a procurement process. The third problem is when the accountant is selected, there's no fee quote or budget. So you're kind of a little bit at the mercy of what they end up charging you. So every month we had been taken up until the very last day of the contract before moving the arbitration process forward. Finally, we have this expert determinator. Finally, they start the work. They end up then taking 2 months longer than they said they were going to take. So all of a sudden, it's like, it's not far off a year that all of that money that is being due to be paid to myself and the other shareholders is still being held by the seller. Eventually, the expert determinator comes out with their ruling, and we end up getting almost double the original offer. So in some ways, great success.
Okay. So you got paid for your suffering.
We got paid for our suffering. The part that really hurt was we lost over £500,000, £550,000, because we had this clause in the earnout called connected parties. Now, the connected parties clause, it's designed to stop me going to my cousin and saying, hey, start a new business, become my customer, pay me all this money for 2 months, and then I'll make a massive amount on the earnout, and it's to stop you basically acting poorly. The other side used it to this most beautiful argument where one of our shareholders was employed by a massive estate agent, the biggest in the UK, over 7,000 employees. They were not in the department related to the contract at all. And I even got the CEO of the company to provide a written statement saying they're not related. This is an arm's length contract. We ran a procurement process. It was competitive. The expert determinator decided to play it super safe. And they said, well, because they're also a shareholder and they work at the customer, I'm judging them to be a connected party. So we lost that revenue, over £500,000. The bit that really wrinkles is connected party in tax law is actually a defined term. And it means that the person has to have a controlling interest in the business. And our shareholder didn't have a controlling interest. So if our lawyers had capitalized the C of connected party, it would then have been deemed a defined term under English and Welsh law. And then it would have specifically meant that they were not a connected party, and we would have gotten the extra £500,000.
So literally lack of capital letters cost you £500,000, which in dollars, I know we've got a lot of Americans listening, probably about $700,000. That sucks.
It's a learning.
So now that you're looking at this, what are your thoughts? Well, like, what are your reflections? Because obviously with hindsight, we can look at any situation and say, I should have done this, I should have done that. But also, to be honest, some things are just not predictable, because did you make the best decisions that you possibly could with the information that you had?
I think the short answer is no. I think that I probably had a dangerous mixture of ego and naivety. So I ended up getting fired, made redundant from that business. And to me, this was a complete shock, because during the earnout, we grew the company by 4 times. So it was like a record-breaking year. We absolutely smashed it. I was like the top performer in the entire company. I was so shocked that they exited me from the business. In particular, like, I held a lot of really good relationships with the key customers, and I totally didn't see that coming. So I think I had valued the personal relationships much more than the actual hard leverage. So things like, if we had not done the 100-day plan of integrating the companies until after the earnout, it would have been very difficult for them to exit me from the business, because they wouldn't have been integrated and they wouldn't have had control. If I had been more realistic about treating the acquirer as if they were a complete stranger, perhaps even an enemy, an adversary, and making sure that everything was in writing, everything was super clear. Everything that was in writing about the exit of the company was on my personal email address. So newsflash to me, running my own company, I always kind of thought of it as, I was the majority shareholder. I always thought of it as my company, an extension of me. All of a sudden, 6.5 years of emails are no longer belong to me. I can't access to them. I also can't use them in court. So some really simple learning lessons, like, if it's to do with the sale of the business, that should all be on your personal email, not on your work email, because you're going to lose access to all of that. And yeah, I think I read the contract in good faith, thinking, this clause is designed to protect them. I didn't read the contract thinking, how could they screw me with every single clause, which is probably how a contract like that should be read. So I think, I would have retained the leverage. I would never give, going forwards as well, I would just never give up leverage without a reason. Always hold on to the leverage unless there's a very clear reason. And if there is a reason, make sure it's recorded and documented in writing that you own personally so that you've got proof of what's going on.
So basically, retain your power base, keep your evidence 100%. As much as possible.
100%.
Well, you're still young. It's a Machiavellian lesson to learn. Let's see what happens next. So when, there are lots of investors and founders and also people in corporate innovation departments, who are working on things and they might end up selling them. And so what's your advice to them? Apart from, keep your power, look through the contract. But the reason why I'm saying I want to go a bit deeper here is, people really want an exit. When people are starting a company, they want an exit either in the form of an IPO or, most likely a sale. Like that's a really good outcome for a lot of people and investors. And so when you've got this thing that you really want and it's kind of then dangled in front of you, of course, it's quite normal to then roll over and just let people tickle your belly, metaphorically speaking, of course. So and then, of course, no wonder you then stop thinking about your power positions and you give things up because there's this thing that you have basically really wanted. And, you can kind of almost taste the money and you've already in your mind, like bought the new house and, spent it. So what would you say to either a shareholder who is coming close to that or, maybe, high level employee or a founder? Like, what do you say to them?
So I split into a couple of thoughts here. One is about, and they ultimately come down to the same concept of optionality. So if you're selling a company or some IP or doing a deal, there is a reason the other side wants to buy it. So maybe they want access to distribution. Maybe they want access to technology and IP. Maybe they want access to your team. There is some precipitative reason as to why they want to do this deal. The motivation of why are they focusing on this as opposed to everything else? The second thing is then going to be how do they value the deal? And that's kind of got two components. Likely, not always, but I think most of the time, it's going to come down to money. What is your revenue? What is your revenue growth? What is your EBITDA? Are you growing really, really quickly? Are you highly profitable? And then the third part is going to be what multiple are they giving you based on your financials? Are they going to give you a 3 times revenue? Are they going to give you a 5 times EBITDA, 50 times EBITDA? And there's a whole bunch of different levers as to why they might pay you more. And there's a whole bunch of different acquirers that would value the business very differently. So understanding those levers and metrics are really important to you as the vendor because it reminds you that you have optionality. First of all, if you are profitable, you can just say no to the deal at any time and continue to run the business. And actually, when you end up with a lump sum of cash and you have to invest it, it becomes quite apparent that very few things are going to give as good a return as your own business where you have your own equity. It's hard to beat the return of a fast growing business. There will always be other exit opportunities. And I think it is much better to have zero ambiguity on the legals and retain all your power and walk away from a deal than urgently rush to it and then is a failure. For example, we had another offer to sell the business and it seemed like a really good offer. Apart from there was this mixture of cash and equity. And when it came down to reviewing the equity in the inquiring business, what they had done was they had valued us at 3 times revenue. And they had valued themselves at 120 times revenue so that they could pay us significantly in equity at a tiny proportion. And it was so guys, if you want to value us at 120 times revenue, we'll do the deal. Or if you want to value yourselves at 3 times revenue, we'll do the deal. But otherwise, it's a no-go. So sometimes you just have to retain the power. It's the age-old law of negotiations. If you have more power, you can choose to walk away. And I think that's absolutely key. So if you can make sure you've built your business in a way that it is profitable, you're not running out of money, you're not worried about competition, you'd be happy to keep running it for another 3 to 5 years. Or if you've created a competitive playing field where multiple companies are bidding to buy you and you can dictate terms as opposed to have them dictated to you, that's going to facilitate a happier exit.
Well, it's like dating, isn't it? So when you're not desperate, then everybody wants you. So how are you using these lessons now? Because you started another company now.
Yeah. So I was in two minds about starting another company because I know how hard it is. And I know that it's a 7 to 10 year commitment. So it's really signing up for something.
Longer than the average marriage, isn't it?
Oh, that's a terrifying thought.
From what I hear.
Terrifying. Very possibly. I think probably 3 things tempted me back into running another company. One was I really wanted to take these lessons and reapply them and keep my skills sharp and move forwards with learning. That's a big driver for me. The second was I built up some really good assets. And by that, I specifically mean networks and connections. So in the last company, I have the phone numbers of some of the CEOs of the largest companies in the UK, and I know them and I put a lot of time and energy into building relationships with them. And that gives you a really good competitive advantage if you're launching a new product. And I was like, I've got this advantage. I should utilize it. It's going to make my life a lot easier in the second time round of selling. And then the third big thing that really pushed me was just getting blown away by how good conversational AI had become and thinking about everything that we'd done in the automation and pre-qualification world. We're pre-qualifying over 10 million people a year using really boring like questionnaires and then looking at how much better we could deliver a similar service using conversational AI. I was like, oh, I want to be involved in rolling this technology out.
So what does your company do now? And what's it called?
The company is called OpenFi, which was originally short for Open Financial Intelligence. And in the last business we were selling to estate agents, and I'm actually still in a non-compete. It was a 3-year non-compete. So I can't sell to estate agents for a little bit longer. But what we did do was we integrated with the 4 largest mortgage brokers in the UK. So we understand their systems and their people quite well. What we looked at doing and we've started to build is we're automating the SDR or sales development representative role. So the key here is inbound traffic from a website or outbound to historic customers, be it a farmer or a hunter role, being able to continually reach out to the customer. AI is amazing at being able to follow up, being able to answer any single question they have. So part of what we do is we read the company's entire website, all their onboarding documents, so that the AI can answer anything. And then most importantly, pre-qualifying that person. So making sure if we are booking them in for an appointment with a mortgage advisor, that person's time is really valuable. We only want to book them in if they're actually progressible and they've actually scored enough points to go in the diary. So we're fully automating website traffic from mortgage brokers right through to booked appointments in CRM.
So interesting, because I literally had a call today with a client and we were discussing an idea kind of that she has, and she already runs a business. She wanted to add a technological aspect to it. And essentially kind of the way we were discussing like what would be the first MVP was first we talked about, okay, well, imagine this without any fancy technology, no AI, like, okay, you're allowed to send emails and you can have a basic Squarespace website, but like, that's it. And then work backwards from that. And it seems, and once we did that, once she created an idea of what it would look like without scale, then it was pretty easy to figure out, okay, create this MVP, which is not scalable, test these assumptions, and then scaling is like, it's quite obvious what you would do next. And it seems like your first company was kind of the do things that don't scale, which you still managed to scale, and then kind of adding AI to that. Well, awesome, Sam. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing this dramatic story and the lessons learned, because I think we don't hear much about the reality of exits. And often people say they've had an exit, and I know people who've had exits and They basically got paid like a 6-month salary. And then I also know people who've had exits, in the millions upon millions of dollars. So, and they're both exits. And for obvious reasons, people don't want to talk about it. So it's really interesting to hear about the ins and outs of what actually happens, because when people get into them, I think also when you're an operator, and also if you're not an investor who's very used to making these deals, you don't know what you're doing, and you're dealing with a counterparty who is very used to making these kinds of deals. And so they know their rights and they know the law inside out, and you don't. And I think this is kind of this asymmetry of information. It's the same with making venture capital deals. So venture capitalists are very transactional. They're very used to negotiating terms. And so, for example, if you do want to raise money from a venture capitalist, I would just recommend taking a course. I did mine at business school. You don't have to do it at business school. Just do it online, just so you understand what goes into a term sheet, so you can negotiate it properly. Because, when you're going to people who are negotiating professionally and you're negotiating for the first time, who's most likely to win? And, they've got enough money. I don't want them to win. Well, so where can people find you, Sam, if they want to find out more about OpenFi?
Yeah, so you can come to openfi.tech, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Sam Oliver.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophia.